subscribe. Join us.
They say the Appalachian Mountains are the oldest bones of this country, and that every ridge, every hollow, remembers what was buried there. Over the years, hikers have vanished. Cabins have been found with doors open, meals half-eaten, beds still warm. Locals whisper about things that move through the timber at night. Not animals, not people. These are the stories they don't print in the papers. 8 true encounters from deep in the Appalachian wilderness. Brief pause. The sound of a branch snapping somewhere close. So turn off your lights. Let the forest close in. And remember, in these mountains, when something calls your name, don't answer.
I grew up on the northern edge of Ridgefield Valley, a place where the woods never seemed to end. My grandparents' house sat in a patch of grass that felt like the last clearing before the forest swallowed everything. From the porch, you could see the tree line rising up like a wall, the air thick with pine, and the scent of wet earth. When I was a kid, that isolation felt like protection. I used to believe nothing could cross that line of trees unless my grandfather allowed it. He was that kind of man, the quiet, steady sort who always seemed to know more than he ever said. If a branch cracked at the far end of the property, he'd pause mid-sentence, tilt his head, and murmur, "That'll be the wind, or it won't." Then he'd sip his coffee and keep listening, like he was waiting for the forest to speak back. I thought he was invincible, and because I believed that, I thought I was safe. But the forest has a way of remembering things long after people forget. When my grandparents passed, first him, then her, the house sat empty for years. Nobody wanted it. Too far from town, too much work, too many memories. When the paperwork finally caught up with me, I drove back to Ridgefield Valley with a knot in my chest and a promise to myself. 3 nights only. Pack what mattered, sign the papers, and never come back. By the time the gravel road narrowed into dirt, my cell signal had vanished. The woods pressed in from both sides, branches scraping the roof of my car. I rolled the windows down, and the air smelled exactly as I remembered, like rain-soaked bark and something older underneath. When the house appeared through the trees, my breath caught. The porch sagged low, half-eaten by rot. A single shutter hung crooked, tapping softly against the siding whenever the wind changed. The lock turned too easily under my hand. Inside, the air was heavy. Old wood, mothballs, and that sour wet leaf smell that clings to places time forgot. Dust floated in the late light like fine ash. Every step I took made the floor groan. The kitchen was almost untouched, the dishes still stacked in yellowed cabinets. My grandmother's knitting basket sat beneath her chair, the same half-finished scarf coiled there, yarn faded to gray. It felt like I'd stepped into a photograph that hadn't realized the people were gone. I worked until the sun dipped behind the trees, packed a few boxes, ate a sandwich over the sink while staring into the black wall of trunks outside the window. It felt like staring into a crowd that refused to move. When night came, the silence settled thick. No cars, no lights, no hum of distant power lines, just the tick of the old clock in the hallway and the sound of my own breathing. I told myself I was just tired.
It must have been after midnight when I woke to a sound, a slow, deliberate scrape coming from beneath the floor. At first, I thought it was a raccoon or some other animal rooting around, but the longer I listened, the more it didn't sound right. The movement wasn't random, it was measured. A steady dragging, then a pause, then another scrape. Like fingers tracing the grain of the wood, feeling for something. My heart hammered so hard I felt it in my throat. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop. But it didn't. Then came a soft thud, like a palm pressing flat against the underside of the floor. Another, and another. I lay there in the dark, gripping the blanket so tight my hands ached. Every instinct screamed to move, to run, to do anything but lie still. Yet I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my muscles locked. The sounds went on for what felt like forever, scraping, pressing, pausing. Then, as suddenly as they began, they stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I didn't sleep again that night. I waited for dawn, staring at the sliver of light creeping under the curtain. When morning finally came, I forced myself outside. The grass was damp with dew. I crouched near the crawlspace vents, peered inside with a flashlight. Nothing. Just dirt and cobwebs. No footprints. No sign anything had been there. I told myself I dreamed it, that I was exhausted and jumpy and making things up. But all day I couldn't stop glancing at the hatch in the kitchen floor, the one that led down into the crawlspace. It sat flush with the boards, a small metal ring for a handle, harmless, ordinary. And yet, every time I walked past it, my stomach knotted. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in bed with my back to the wall, flashlight on my lap. The house creaked like it was breathing. Hours crawled by. Then, just after midnight, the sound came again. The scraping. Closer this time. It slid along the boards, stopped beneath the bed. I could hear the wood flex, soft under the weight. My pulse thundered in my ears. Then, a voice. Low, wet, muffled, coming from beneath me. The words didn't make sense, just the shape of them, like someone whispering through a mouthful of dirt. That broke me. I grabbed my bag, swung my legs over the side, and ran. The hallway felt endless, the floorboards crying out under every step. When I reached the stairs, I stopped dead. The hatch in the kitchen was lifting. Slowly, deliberately, something pale was pushing through the gap, an arm streaked with mud, long and thin, fingers splayed wide. I bolted. The front door flew open under my shoulder. Cold air hit my face as I ran across the clearing into the tree line. The grass clung wet to my ankles. I hid behind the first oak I reached, heart slamming so hard I thought I'd pass out. Then, the front door creaked open. Footsteps, soft, unhurried, moving into the yard. They paused, turned, then started walking toward the trees, toward me. I pressed my cheek against the bark, too afraid to breathe. The sound came closer, footsteps in the grass, the faint rustle of leaves. Then, silence. When the first gray light broke over the ridge, the door was open again, the hatch closed, neat as if nothing had happened. I didn't look back when I left. I didn't take the boxes. I just drove until the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror. That was the first story, but not the last. Because in the Appalachian woods, when something starts calling from beneath the floor, it never calls just once.
I was 26 the year my cousin Mason decided we needed to hike into Fox Hollow. You'd think that after growing up in eastern Kentucky, we would have learned to leave certain places alone. But Mason never believed in local stories. To him, anything unproven was just superstition, something to laugh about over a campfire. He'd read about Fox Hollow on some old hiking forum. The post said there were stretches of land so remote that maps gave up halfway through. "That's where I want to go," Mason said, his grin wide and reckless, "where the map goes blank." I told him it was a bad idea. My granddad used to say that certain ridges swallowed people whole. Hunters went missing there, he said, found their trucks, found their dogs, never found them. I still remember the way he'd stare toward the tree line after saying that, like he could see something standing just beyond the last row of pines. But Mason just laughed. He always did. So that's how we ended up bumping down an old service road in his beat-up truck, a rusted gate yawning open ahead of us like a mouth. The hinges screamed when he kicked it aside. We parked in a patch of gravel that looked older than both of us combined. The woods there were different, darker, denser, the kind of silence that feels thick enough to lean on. The first few miles were easy enough. The path started wide, an old maintenance trail that wound through rolling hills and crossed a narrow creek. Every so often we'd spot remnants of old life, a chimney with no house, a rusted stove sinking into the dirt, the frame of the barn folded in on itself. I remember thinking how strange it was that people had ever tried to live here. By late afternoon, the forest had gone quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of our boots on dry leaves. Mason said it felt like we'd stepped out of time. He wasn't wrong. We set up camp beside a creek, the water low enough to hop across. He bragged about his primitive skills, using a flint striker to light the fire while I boiled noodles over a dented pot. The smell of smoke should have been comforting. It wasn't. When darkness fell, the woods felt too close. The firelight reached only a few feet before the shadows swallowed everything. I remember the first sound, faint, like leaves shifting under something heavy. I froze mid-breath. Mason didn't notice. He was humming, half drunk on his own confidence. The noise came again, slower this time, deliberate, like footsteps. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear something circling the edge of the camp, moving carefully as if testing us. When dawn came, I told myself it was an animal. It had to be. The second day, the trail got rougher, more like a deer path than a real road. Branches snagged our packs and moss-covered rocks made the climb slow. Around midday, Mason spotted a weathered sign nailed high on a tree. The paint had faded to near white, but I could still make out the words, "No Return Trail." Mason laughed. "Gotta love the local humor." I didn't answer. I couldn't find the words. I just shook my head. That night we didn't build a fire. I told him we were conserving wood, but the truth was, I didn't want to draw attention. The night pressed in, heavy and thick. Somewhere out in the dark, something shifted. I heard leaves crunch in a slow rhythm. Step, pause, step. Then silence. And then my mother's voice, soft, familiar, calling my name. My blood ran cold. She'd been dead for years. I shook Mason awake, but his sleeping bag was empty. My flashlight beam jumped across the trees, landing on nothing. My throat locked up. I called his name once, twice, and the forest answered back with my mother's voice again, closer this time. "Go on." That's when I saw it. Half hidden behind a black oak, 20 yards away, The same pale figure, its shoulders too high, its limbs too long, its head tilted like a curious animal, the skin stretched tight over bones that didn't belong to any living thing. I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the brush. Behind me, voices echoed, my mother's, Mason's, even my own, calling my name in perfect unison. By the time I stumbled out onto the old service road, the sky was bleeding gray into morning. I collapsed, gasping, dirt in my teeth. Hours later, a ranger found me walking barefoot along the shoulder of a logging road. He gave me water, asked where my friend was. I couldn't answer. I didn't tell him about the voices or the thing with no eyes, because I knew, even if I did, he wouldn't go looking. That was the second story. And in the Appalachians, the second story always begins closer to home.
I grew up in a small corner of southern Missouri, one of those towns where the world seems to end a few miles past the gas station. When I left for St. Louis in my 20s, I swore I'd never come back except for holidays. But last October I did. My Uncle Randall had died unexpectedly, and I went home out of obligation more than grief. The funeral was small. Wooden pews, hymnals yellowed with age, and the smell of lemon oil and wilted flowers. Afterward, I stood outside the church in the cool air, staring across the parking lot at the line of hills on the horizon. I'd forgotten how the mountains looked at dusk, the way their edges turned black before the sky lost its light. I should have driven back to the city that night. Instead, I told myself I needed time to clear my head. So, I packed a small rucksack, a tarp, a sleeping bag, a knife, a thermos of gas station coffee, and drove out to a place I'd only ever heard about in stories. Locals called it Jasper Bend. People said a group of loggers had vanished there sometime in the late 1800s. Some said it was a rock slide. Others swore the men had simply walked into the woods and never walked back out. When I reached the trailhead, the last of the sunlight was sliding off the ridge. A rusted gate hung open on one hinge. A faded sign bolted to it. I could barely make out the grooves of carved letters. Maybe it used to say no trespassing. Maybe not. The trail wasn't much more than a crease through the underbrush. Every few yards, roots curled over the dirt like veins. Branches clawed at my jacket. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. After a while, I came across a clearing. A ring of moss-covered stones surrounded the skeleton of a foundation. The remains of a cabin, maybe. Right in the middle of the circle grew a sapling, thin and crooked, pushing out of a shallow pit. The sight of it made my stomach tighten. I skirted around it without stepping closer. By the time I reached the river, the sky was nearly black. The water was low, more rock than stream. I found a dry patch beneath the bluff and built a small fire. The flames threw shadows that looked like hands reaching up from the dirt. For a long time I sat listening, to the wind, to the trickle of water, to the whisper of leaves rubbing together overhead. It almost felt peaceful. Then I saw the footprints. They were faint, half smudged into the silt near my own boots. Too narrow for an adult, too far apart for a child. The spacing made no sense, as if whoever left them had been leaping or moving in a way my mind couldn't picture. I told myself they were old, maybe weeks, maybe months. That lie lasted until I heard the whistle. 2 short notes, a pause, then 2 more. It came from the slope above me, clear and deliberate, like someone signaling an answer. I called out, my voice cracking in the stillness. Hello? Nothing. The fire sputtered.
and the silence afterward was heavy, like the whole forest had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. When I finally crawled into my tent, I left the flap unzipped and the knife across my chest. Every creak of fabric felt like a footstep. Every brush of wind sounded like breathing. At some point, exhaustion must have won. I woke later to the sound of leaves crunching, slow, measured, each step deliberate. It stopped just outside my tent. The air went thick, pressing down on my chest. Then something pressed against the nylon. A single finger, tracing the curve of my leg through the fabric. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The pressure lingered a few seconds, slid higher toward my knee, then lifted. Footsteps retreated into the dark. I lay there until dawn. When I crawled out, the ground was smooth. No tracks, no disturbed leaves, nothing. I packed in minutes, hands shaking too hard to tie knots. I told myself I'd laugh about it later, once I'd had sleep and sunlight and a proper breakfast. That illusion shattered the moment I saw what was waiting by my truck. A strip of bark, curled and pale, leaned against the door. Someone had carved into it. A stick figure with long legs, an oval head, and no arms. The cuts were fresh. The wood still wept sap. I dropped it like it burned and drove until the road turned to pavement again. That was the third story. And if you think that's where the wilderness ends, you've never lived near Nolan Hollow. Because what waits in the Appalachians doesn't always stay outside your walls.
Elkford, West Virginia. Population, maybe 100 on a good day. That's where I ended up when my life came apart. My girlfriend left, my job hours got cut, and my mother kept calling to remind me that starting over didn't mean hiding from the world. The house belonged to my uncle. Locals called it the place out by Nolan's Hollow, and they said it like that should explain everything. It sat 2 miles off the main road, perched on a slope that always looked one rainstorm away from collapse. 2 stories of weathered wood, every plank gray as bone. The foundation was old stacked stone, cracked wide enough to lose a coin through. When I first moved in, I told myself it was temporary, just a break to get my head straight. Days were quiet. I fixed drafts, chopped wood, listened to the radio when the generator behaved. Nights were harder. That's when the house made sounds. Not normal settling creaks, but slow, deliberate pacing somewhere above me. I tried not to think about it. The first real night it happened, I was reading downstairs, instant noodles cooling in a bowl beside me. The sound came from the porch. A dry scraping, like something being dragged. I looked up from the book, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. It ended with 3 taps against the front door. Not frantic, not hesitant, calm. I told myself it was raccoons. That's what I told myself a lot of things in those days. I checked the window, nothing there but empty porch boards slick with frost. I opened the door an inch, and the cold hit me like a slap. Damp, sour, like rainwater left too long in a bucket. The yard was still. No footprints in the mud, no tracks. Just the smell. I closed the door, locked it, and sat back down, heart still thudding, but trying to be rational. Midnight came, and the knock came again. 3 short raps, slow and patient. I didn't answer, didn't breathe. When I finally looked through the peephole, the porch was empty, just the rocking chair swaying a little in the wind. I told myself I was fine, but I kept the revolver on my lap that night. An hour passed, then 2. The adrenaline faded. My arms went numb. I started to believe it was over until I heard the footsteps upstairs. Not the soft creaks of a settling house. Real footsteps moving across the hallway. Heavy, measured, back and forth. I froze. The revolver felt heavy in my hand, almost too heavy to lift. I called out, "Hello!" Silence. Then the steps started again, this time heading toward the top of the stairs. My mouth went dry. I stood and moved to the base of the staircase, every board groaning under my weight. The bulb in the upstairs hallway had worked that afternoon. Now, when I flipped the switch, nothing. Just darkness staring back. I raised the gun and climbed. Each step echoed, slow and deliberate. My uncle's bedroom door stood half open at the end of the hall. I pushed it with my foot. Empty. Window locked, closet bare, the bed still made. And then, whispering. It came from behind my bedroom door, thin and papery, like someone mumbling through a veil. I turned, heart slamming, breath shallow. The voice rose just enough for me to hear the rhythm, not words, just sounds, a language I didn't recognize. I pressed my ear to the door. It was cold. Cold enough that the skin stuck for a half second. Then, in that same dry whisper, something said my name. I jerked back, kicked the door open, gun raised. Nothing. The room was empty. My bed unmade, my duffel bag slouched against the wall, but there was movement. A shape slid along the far wall. Tall and thin, wrapped in something that shimmered like wet burlap. I saw it just long enough to understand what I was seeing. The faint outline of a body pressed too close to the wall, moving as if the plaster itself was breathing. I fired. The sound cracked through the house, deafening. When my vision cleared, the shape was gone. The smell it left behind, soil and decay. I didn't stay to look for bullet holes. I ran. Down the stairs, out the door, into the gravel drive barefoot. The air was so cold it bit into my lungs. When I finally turned, the house looked like a shadow carved out of the night. No lights, no sound, just stillness. I waited there until sunrise, sitting on the hood of my truck, revolver in my hand, watching frost climb up the windshield. When the first light hit the ridge, I packed what little I had and drove away. I never went back. But sometimes, when the night's quiet enough, I still hear it. That slow drag across wood, followed by 3 soft knocks. That was the 4th story. And it's the one that taught me the Appalachians don't always haunt the woods. Sometimes they find their way inside.
I was 24 when I went back to my grandfather's place in eastern Tennessee. He'd been gone for years, but no one had bothered to clean out the old house. My uncle said it was a good chance to clear the property and close that chapter. He didn't mention how heavy a chapter it really was. The house sat at the edge of a hollow that everyone in town called cursed, not in the ghost story way, but with the heavy certainty of something that had earned a name. My uncle used to say, "That hollow's older than the graves, older than the families who dug them. Then he'd stop talking, like he'd said too much already. When I arrived, the place looked half swallowed by the hillside. Kudzu vines had eaten the porch, wrapping around the railings like green ropes. The old satellite dish had collapsed under the weight of years of rain and rust. Every window was clouded with grime, reflecting nothing but the sky. Inside, the smell hit me like a punch. Mildew, paper rot, and something sharp underneath, like copper. I spent the first few hours hauling out boxes, jars, and stacks of yellowed newspapers. Everything felt damp, even the air. By the time dusk fell, I'd filled half the truck bed. I was tired, hungry, and dizzy from the smell of decay. That's when I saw the keys, a small ring hanging on a bent nail by the door. Polaris, my grandfather's old ATV. I hadn't thought about it in years, but seeing those keys made something spark inside me, a memory of sunlight, of racing down the trails while he watched from the porch, pretending not to worry. Maybe I just wanted to feel that again. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't scared of a patch of overgrown woods. So I took the keys. The ATV coughed twice before coming to life. The engine's growl broke through the quiet like a challenge. I eased it down the old service trail, bouncing over roots and ruts that had deepened over the years. The further I went, the more the path narrowed, trees closing in on either side like the woods were trying to swallow me whole. After about a mile, I passed an old hunting blind nailed into a walnut tree. The ladder was snapped halfway up, splintered in a way that didn't look like rot. It looked like force, something big putting its weight where it shouldn't. I told myself it was nothing, just weather and time. Then I came to the clearing. 3 rusted trailers sat there in a loose half-circle, their siding eaten away by holes and lichen. The doors were gone, the windows shattered. The whole place had this sunken, abandoned look, like it had been waiting to collapse. But there were tire tracks in the mud, fresh ones. I killed the engine and listened. Nothing. No birds, no wind, not even the buzz of insects. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your heartbeat. I climbed off and walked closer, boots sinking into the damp clay. The air smelled sour, metallic. When I stepped through the door of the first trailer, the floor crunched under my weight, leaves, bones, and fragments of carpet. That's when I saw the pile in the corner. Bones. Small ones, stacked in neat rows. At first I thought they were animal remains, maybe dogs, maybe deer, but there was something wrong about the way they were arranged. Too symmetrical, too careful. And above them, strung across the doorway, hung a line of skulls, each one drilled through the crown and threaded with twine, dangling like wind chimes that didn't move. I stumbled back, bile burning in my throat. I should have left right then. I know that now. But there were tracks leading deeper into the trees. Some part of me had to know what was at the end of them. Not curiosity exactly, more like the sick pull of unfinished business. The tracks wound down into a ravine. Boards nailed to trees bore strange symbols, spirals intersected with stick figures, circles crossed by jagged lines. Some of them were painted, others carved deep into the bark. The closer I looked, the more the markings felt like warnings. At the bottom of the hollow, half buried in shadow, I found the remains of a stone foundation. It sloped into the hillside, and inside the collapsed wall was a doorway, a black hole leading straight underground. The smell rolling out of it was thick and wet, rot layered over something sweet like spoiled fruit. I raised my flashlight, and the beam caught the outline of burlap sacks piled in the far corner. One of them moved, just slightly. a slow shift like something inside was rolling over. Then came the sound, a long, wet inhale, the unmistakable drag of breath through lungs that shouldn't still be working. I stepped back once, then again. The light trembled in my hand. That's when someone grabbed my shoulder. A man stood beside me. His beard was gray, his face half hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes caught a light just long enough for me to see they were empty. "Don't go in there," he said. His voice was calm, almost polite. I couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. He leaned close enough that I could smell damp soil on his breath. "You don't belong here," he whispered. "Run." He let go, and I did exactly what he said. I sprinted uphill, crashing through branches, stumbling over roots. My flashlight swung wild, catching glimpses of symbols and white bone. When I reached the clearing again, the trailers looked darker, the air heavier. I climbed onto the ATV, fingers shaking so hard I could barely turn the key. The engine sputtered, then caught, and I gunned it all the way back up the trail. By the time I saw the roof of the old house, the sun was bleeding through the trees. I parked beside the porch and sat there shaking, gripping the handlebars until my knuckles went white. When dawn came, I loaded everything I'd packed into the truck. I didn't tell anyone what I saw, didn't even mention the man. Because deep down, I knew no one would believe me. That was the fifth story. And if you ever find yourself in a hollow where even the birds refuse to sing, don't wait for someone to tell you to run.
I was 24 when my cousin Paige called and asked for help clearing out her grandfather's cabin. It was tucked somewhere in the Blue Ridge, a part of the mountains where GPS turns into guesswork and the air always smells like rain waiting to fall. Paige's voice on the phone sounded tight, like someone holding back tears. She said she couldn't do it alone, not after what had happened. Her grandfather had been found in the kitchen, gone for days before anyone realized it. I didn't want to go, not really. But when someone you grew up with asks you to stand beside them in the dark, you don't say no. The driveway was more a trail than a road. Ruts and weeds, mud slick enough to swallow tires. When the trees opened into a clearing, the cabin leaned to one side, half sunk into the earth. It looked wrong, like a photograph left too long in the sun. The colors faded, edges curling. We sat in the car for a long minute before getting out. Even with the windows closed, I could smell the rot. Paige whispered, "He used to sit out here and talk to himself for hours." I pretended I hadn't heard. The front door creaked open under my hand. The smell hit us like a wave. Dust, mold, and something sour underneath. The air felt thick enough to chew. Furniture leaned at angles, cobwebs hanging like old lace. Paige covered her nose with her shirt. "Let's just do it fast." We split up. She started on the living room. I went to the kitchen. The floor sagged under my boots. Cabinets lined with brittle newspapers. Glass jars clouded by time. There was a dark stain by the stove I tried not to look at. In the bedroom, rows of shelves bowed under jars filled with murky liquid, each one labeled in her grandfather's shaky handwriting. Okra, beans, peaches, but some of them weren't food. One jar held something pale and curled, like a small animal folded in on itself. I swear I saw it twitch.
I closed the door and told myself it was just my nerves. Hours passed in a blur of dust and silence. Every so often, Paige would glance down the hallway like she expected someone to walk out of it. I wanted to tell her not to, but the words stuck. By late afternoon, the light had gone gray. When I checked my watch, my stomach tightened. Almost 6. "Let's check the cellar and get out before dark," I said. Paige froze. "He never let me down there." "Why?" "He said it wasn't safe." I tried to sound casual. "Rotten boards, probably." But when I opened the door, the hinges groaned like a warning. Cold air rolled up the steps, wet and earthy like something breathing slow. I aimed my flashlight down. The stairs were narrow and unfinished, leading into a space swallowed by shadow. I told Paige to wait by the door. Each step complained under my weight. Halfway down, the smell changed from mold to meat. The beam caught a workbench scarred by knife marks. Empty hooks hung above it, swaying gently, though there was no draft. Shelves lined the back wall, more jars, their contents gray and shapeless. I moved closer. The light trembled in my hand. Then I heard footsteps above me. "Paige?" I called. No answer. "Paige!" The steps stopped. Then her muffled voice through the floorboards. "Elowen, there's someone outside." My pulse spiked. "What do you mean?" "He's just standing there, in the trees." I took the stairs 2 at the time, shoulder slamming the door. It didn't budge. The latch had clicked from the other side. "Paige, open the door!" Her voice cracked. "He's watching me." "Then come inside." Silence. The only sound left was my heartbeat. Then, movement behind me. Something unfolded from the dark. Long limbs bent backward, skin the color of candle wax stretched over bones that didn't fit together right. It crawled from behind a stack of burlap sacks, dragging itself forward with slow, wet pulls. Where its face should have been was smooth, pale flesh, no eyes, no mouth, just the hint of where they should have been. It made a sound, not a growl, not a hiss, something softer, like breath caught in a throat that had forgotten how to speak. I stumbled backward up the stairs, slamming my shoulder into the door. The wood cracked. Another hit. The door burst open, light spilling down. Paige stood there, eyes wide, hand shaking. "He went back into the woods," she whispered. I didn't look to see if she was right. We ran. Across the porch, down the steps, through the weeds choking the yard. When we reached my truck, the air felt different, thinner, like the world was trying to catch its breath. I threw it into gear, tires spinning mud. Paige stared out the window, pale as paper. She asked, Did you see it?" I didn't answer. I just kept driving. Halfway down the trail, I risked a glance in the mirror. Something moved between the trees. Tall, skeletal, too smooth to be human. It stepped sideways out of the light, melting into the shadows. Paige let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. She pressed her hand over her mouth and wouldn't speak for the rest of the drive. We didn't stop until the tires hit pavement. Only then did I breathe again. That was the 6th story. And if you ever find a cellar door that opens too easily, leave it closed.
I was 32 when I decided to spend a full week alone in the Blue Valley Range, the most remote stretch of the Appalachians I could reach without a guide. I'd done plenty of solo camping before, but this trip felt different, necessary. I told myself it was about proving I could handle the quiet, the kind that gets under your skin and starts whispering in your thoughts. The plan was simple. 6 nights, maybe 7, no contact, no signal. I packed everything carefully. New tent, new batteries, a small radio, 3 knives, because somehow that number felt safer than 1. I told my brother I'd check in when I got back. He joked that I'd end up as the opening scene of some found footage horror story. We laughed about it, but the words stuck in my head all the same. By dawn the next day, I was driving through fog so thick it felt like the mountains were swallowing me. The trailhead wasn't even marked, just a break in the trees and a gravel scrape pretending to be a parking spot. I stepped out, stretched, and listened. No wind, no birds, just the slow drip of moisture from leaves. For the first 2 days, everything went according to plan. I hiked 12 miles, past a crumbling chimney that must have belonged to a cabin a century ago, and found a spot flat enough for camp near a small stream. The forest around me looked untouched. No footprints, no signs of other people. It was exactly the kind of solitude I'd been craving. That first night was uneventful. I wrote in my journal, cooked freeze-dried stew, stared into the fire until my mind went blank. When I finally crawled into my tent, I rested my hand on my belt knife, not out of fear, but habit. By the second day, the silence started to change. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was expectant. Every crack of a branch sounded intentional. Every breeze that stirred the leaves felt like it was circling me, testing me. That afternoon, I noticed something strange in the gully below camp. A patch of freshly turned dirt. It didn't look like any animal burrow I knew, too wide, too shallow, and no sign of digging claws. The soil was still damp, darker than the earth around it. I crouched there for a long time, studying it until I realized I didn't want to know what was under there. That night, I built the fire higher. The shadows at the edge of camp kept their distance, but I couldn't shake the feeling they were waiting for the flames to die. I must have dozed off because I woke to the faintest sound. Breathing. Not mine. Not close, but near enough that I could hear the rhythm. Slow. Deep. Calm. It came from behind one of the boulders that formed the edge of my camp. I sat frozen, every muscle locked. My flashlight was right beside me, but turning it on felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. So I waited. The breathing continued, unhurried, patient, then stopped. I didn't sleep after that. When the sun came up, everything looked normal. I packed my gear in silence and moved my camp 2 miles west, closer to the ridge where the map marked a clearing. The air felt heavier there, like humidity, but colder somehow. That evening, the wind changed. It came from the east, carrying the faintest sound, a voice. At first, I thought it was the wind whistling through the trees, but then it said my name. Not shouted, spoken, calm, even, like the way someone talks when they already know where you're standing. I froze mid-step, scanning the trees. Nothing. I tried to laugh it off, to tell myself I'd imagined it, but the air had shifted. I could feel it. When I finally crawled into the tent, I left my boots on. My knife stayed in my hand. I told myself I'd sleep sitting up. I didn't. The voice came again in the middle of the night. Closer. This time, it whispered, "Why'd you come back?" I held my breath so long my lungs burned. When I couldn't take it anymore, I unzipped the tent just enough to look outside. The clearing was empty. Moonlight painted the trees silver. Nothing moved. Then I saw the boot print. A single print pressed into the mud right beside my fire pit. Bigger than mine. Fresh enough that water still pooled inside it. No other tracks led to or from it. That was enough. By dawn, I was already breaking camp, throwing things into my pack without folding or tying anything down. I didn't eat, I didn't drink, I just moved. The hike back felt endless. Every time I looked behind me, the trail seemed different. Trees standing where they hadn't before. Turns that didn't exist on the way in. I told myself I was just panicking, that I'd lost the sense of direction that had always come naturally to me. But the woods felt alive in a way I couldn't name. Watching, waiting. When I finally reached the road, my legs gave out. I fell to my knees gasping. My car sat exactly where I'd left it. And beside it, half leaning against the driver's door, was a shape. At first, I thought it was a coat someone had hung there, but as I got closer, I realized what I was seeing. A canvas jacket, soaked down the front with something dark, draped over the outline of shoulders that were still too solid to be empty. I didn't look for a face, didn't look for anything. I just climbed into the car, locked the doors, and turned the key with shaking hands. In the rearview mirror, something moved between the trees. I drove until I hit pavement, then didn't stop until I saw houses again. That was the 7th story, and it's the one that convinced me. The mountains don't need ghosts. They make their own.
Some stories don't start with a scream. They start with something small, a sound, a memory, a feeling that something in your bones has gone cold for a reason. Mine began with a phone call from my friend Nate. He'd just bought a patch of land outside of Harlan, Kentucky, a couple of acres that used to belong to a coal company. The kind of place where the ground was stripped and then abandoned, leaving behind shallow pits and ridges that filled with rain. He said he wanted to build a cabin there, something off-grid and quiet. "Come help me clear it," he said. "I'll buy the beer." I told him I'd drive out the next weekend. When I got there, the sky was low and gray. The air smelled like coal dust and iron, even after all these years. Nate's truck was parked near a half-collapsed shed, and beside it he stood grinning like a kid who'd found treasure. "Look at it," he said, waving toward the tree line. "No neighbors, no noise, just us and the hills." He wasn't wrong. The forest pressed tight around the clearing, so dense it looked like it was waiting for us to step too far in. We started working before noon, cutting brush, clearing junk from the old mining road. Every so often we'd find relics of what used to be: rusted drills, broken helmets, a shovel handle that turned to dust when touched. It was somewhere around 3 when we found the shaft. At first it just looked like a sinkhole, a shallow dip in the ground, maybe 10 feet across. But when I kicked a stone into it, I never heard it hit bottom. Nate grinned. "Old mine access, probably. They capped most of them, but this one must have been missed." He leaned over, shining his phone flashlight into the dark. The beam just disappeared. "You shouldn't get that close," I said. He laughed. "Relax. I'm not stupid." He wasn't stupid, but he was curious. That night, after the sun went down, we built a fire and cooked on an old iron skillet he'd brought from home. The air was cool, still, too quiet. No owls, no crickets, just the soft hiss of the fire. Around midnight, Nate said he wanted to drop something down the shaft. "Just to see how deep it goes," he said. I told him no. He laughed again. He picked up a rock, dropped it in, and we both listened. No impact. Just a faint rush of air, like wind being sucked downward. A few seconds later, something answered. Not an echo, not a sound the rock could have made. It was a voice, faint, rising from deep below. Just one word: help. We froze. The sound faded almost as soon as it came, but I know what I heard. I saw Nate's face pale under the firelight. He said, "Probably just an echo of our voices." But neither of us had said a word. He didn't sleep that night. I could hear him pacing near the fire long after I zipped my sleeping bag. Every so often he'd shine his flashlight toward the shaft, then turn it off again. By dawn, he'd made up his mind. "I'm going down there." I told him that was insane. There was no rope, no gear, no way to know if it was even stable. He said, "If there's someone trapped, I can't just ignore it." I wanted to stop him, but he'd already started rigging a line from the winch on his truck. An old climbing harness, duct tape, whatever he could find. I held the rope, my stomach twisting with dread. He lowered himself slowly, his voice echoing upward. 10 feet. 20. Still good. Then silence. I called down, "Nate?" No answer. "Nate!" The rope jerked hard in my hands, once, then slack. I started pulling, my palms burning, trying to haul him back up, but the line came up light, too light. When I reached the end, the harness was still attached, cut clean through.
The rope's end was frayed and blackened, like it had been burned. I stumbled back, staring into the dark mouth of the shaft. For a long time there was nothing, just the soft drip of water echoing below. Then I heard it again. Not Nate's voice. The same one from before. Help! This time clearer. Closer. It wasn't coming from below. It was coming from behind me. I turned, flashlight trembling, beam slicing through the trees. And for just a moment, I saw something move between them. A shape, pale and long-limbed, slipping back into the shadows. The air turned cold, the fire behind me dying down to embers without smoke. I ran. Didn't look back. Didn't stop until the truck lights caught the gravel road. I called the sheriff the next morning. He sent 2 deputies and a search crew. They lowered cameras into the shaft, lights bright enough to burn shadows off the walls. They didn't find Nate. They didn't find anything. Not even the bottom. The footage cut off at 70 feet. Then static. That was the 8th story. And if you ever hear a voice asking for help in the dark, don't answer.
There's a motel off Highway 23 that most folks in the Appalachian foothills pretend doesn't exist. No website, no working phone. Just a faded sign that still reads vacancy in half-broken neon. Locals call it the Rest Easy, but if you stay the night, you don't. I'd been driving 16 hours straight, through rain that came down like gravel, when I saw it, that crooked red glow bleeding through the fog. The highway had gone empty miles ago, and I was too tired to care about anything except a bed. The lot was cracked, weeds growing through asphalt. Only 2 cars, both old, both covered in dust like they hadn't moved in years. The lobby was lit by one flickering bulb. The air smelled of mildew and cheap detergent. The man behind the counter didn't look up when I came in. 40 for the night, he said. His voice sounded distant, like he was speaking through glass. I slid him 2 20s. His hand brushed mine, ice cold, skin paper thin. Room 7, he said, passing me a key on a brass tag. Don't open your door after midnight. I laughed, thinking he was joking. He didn't laugh back. The hallway was long, lined with green carpet that squished underfoot. Every door had peeling paint. Mine was no different. The lock stuck twice before it turned. Inside, a single bed, a dresser, a lamp that buzzed when I turned it on. A crucifix hung crooked above the headboard. I shut the door, dropped my bag, and collapsed onto the mattress. The TV worked, sort of. Static flickered between flashes of an old sitcom. The laugh track bled into white noise. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. It was 12:17 a.m. Something was knocking on the door. Soft, steady, polite. I sat up, heart pounding. Yeah? No answer. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't frantic. It was rhythmic, patient. The clerk's words came back to me. Don't open your door after midnight. I stayed quiet, hoping whoever it was would leave. Then a voice, low, almost gentle. "Please, it's cold." Every instinct screamed no. I said nothing. Another knock. "Please, just open up." The voice sounded closer now, like it was leaning right against the wood. Then, softer. "I can see your light." My skin crawled. The lamp's glow pooled around my feet. I reached out and switched it off. The room went dark. I sat there, breathing slow, counting the seconds. Silence. Then, from the other side of the door, the faint sound of breathing. Long, shallow, careful. After a minute, the doorknob turned. Once. Twice. Then stopped. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat with my back against the wall, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other. By dawn, I could hear birds again. Light filtered through the curtains, thin and gray. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. The carpet, though, was wet. A single set of footprints led away from my room, bare feet, small, each print glistening as if freshly made. They stopped at room 5. The door there was wide open. I shouldn't have looked inside, but I did. The bed was stripped bare. The mattress had a dark stain in the middle. The window curtains hung in tatters, flapping gently in the breeze. And on the nightstand, a key tag. Room 7. Mine. I backed away slow, heart slamming. That's when the phone on the wall started ringing. The old landline hadn't worked when I checked in. I stared at it, frozen. It rang again, and again. I picked it up with a shaking hand. Static hissed for a few seconds, then a voice. "Checkouts at noon." The line went dead. I hung up, grabbed my things, and walked straight out, without locking the door. The man at the counter wasn't there. The lobby was darker now. Dust motes drifted through the air like ash. I left the key on the counter. When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight was breaking through the fog. I turned back once, just once. The sign still buzzed faintly, red letters flickering. Except this time, it didn't say vacancy. It said, "Stay." I drove until the road turned new again, until I saw people, lights, movement, proof that the world still existed. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up the Rest Easy Motel. It had burned down in 1998. That was the 9th story. And sometimes, the scariest places aren't the ones you stumble upon. They're the ones that wait for you to come back. When you grow up in the Appalachians, you get used to hearing things you can't explain. Voices in the trees, footsteps on gravel when nobody's there. Old folks always say it's just the wind, but everyone knows better. My uncle used to tell me stories about a place called Gray Hollow, a stretch of woods nobody went near after dark. He said there used to be a church there, one that never got properly buried. I thought it was one of his usual scare tactics to keep me out of trouble, until the night I found it. It started with a dare. I was 17. My friend Kyle and I had been drinking behind the gas station, cheap whiskey and bad decisions. He said, "You ever been down by the old mining trail?" I shook my head. "That's where the church is. Bet you won't go." I should have laughed it off, but when you're 17 and half drunk, fear feels like a challenge. We took his dad's flashlight and started walking.
The trail wound downhill through the trees, slick with moss. The deeper we went, the quieter it got, like the forest was holding its breath. Then we saw it. Half sunk in the dirt, its steeple snapped like a broken bone. The church looked more like a grave marker than a building. The windows were black holes, the door hanging by one hinge. Kyle whispered, "Creepy as hell, huh?" I didn't answer. My throat had gone dry. We stepped inside. The air was thick and wet, smelling like rot and iron. The pews were splintered, and the pulpit leaned to one side. Behind it, carved into the back wall, were symbols, circles intersecting, triangles with lines through them, some half scratched away. Kyle laughed nervously. Probably kids messing around. Then we heard it, a thud beneath the floorboards. Not a creak, not a rat, a heavy, deliberate thud, like something shifting its weight.
When you grow up in the Appalachians, you get used to hearing things you can't explain. Voices in the trees, footsteps on gravel when nobody's there. Old folks always say it's just the wind, but everyone knows better. My uncle used to tell me stories about a place called Gray Hollow, a stretch of woods nobody went near after dark. He said there used to be a church there, one that never got properly buried. I thought it was one of his usual scare tactics to keep me out of trouble, until the night I found it. It started with a dare. I was 17. My friend Kyle and I had been drinking behind the gas station, cheap whiskey and bad decisions. He said, "You ever been down by the old mining trail?" I shook my head. "That's where the church is. Bet you won't go." I should have laughed it off, but when you're 17 and half drunk, fear feels like a challenge. We took his dad's flashlight and started walking. The trail wound downhill through the trees, slick with moss. The deeper we went, the quieter it got, like the forest was holding its breath. Then we saw it. Half sunk in the dirt, its steeple snapped like a broken bone. The church looked more like a grave marker than a building. The windows were black holes, the door hanging by one hinge. Kyle whispered, "Creepy as hell, huh?" I didn't answer. My throat had gone dry. We stepped inside. The air was thick and wet, smelling like rot and iron. The pews were splintered, and the pulpit leaned to one side. Behind it, carved into the back wall, were symbols, circles intersecting, triangles with lines through them, some half scratched away. Kyle laughed nervously. Probably kids messing around. Then we heard it, a thud beneath the floorboards. Not a creak, not a rat, a heavy, deliberate thud, like something shifting its weight.
Kyle froze. I swung the flashlight toward the sound. The beam shook in my hand. Another thud, closer. Then a voice, low and hoarse, came from under the floor. "Don't pray here." The light flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. We both bolted, Branches slapped our faces as we tore through the woods. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if something was following. When we finally burst out onto the gravel road, the night air felt sharp, clean, like breaking the surface after nearly drowning. We didn't say a word on the drive home. The next morning, Kyle called me. He sounded off, quiet, shaky. He said he'd woken up to mud on his floor. His shoes were still by the door, untouched. That night, he texted me one line: "They're under my house." I called him, no answer. When I drove out to his place, his car was still in the driveway. The front door was open. Inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The living room smelled like dirt. I followed the smell down the hall to the basement door. It was wide open. I called his name once. Something moved below, slow, scraping, like skin dragging over wood. Then I saw his hand. Just his hand, pale and trembling, reaching up from the dark. I turned and ran. When the sheriff came the next day, they said the floor had caved in. That's all they said. But I know what I saw. And sometimes when I drive past that road, I swear I can still hear the sound of wood creaking under weight that shouldn't be there. That was the 10th story. And if you ever find a church in the woods that doesn't show up on any map, keep walking.
When the sun came up, everything looked normal. I packed my gear in silence and moved my camp 2 miles west, closer to the ridge where the map marked a clearing. The air felt heavier there, like humidity, but colder somehow. That evening, the wind changed. It came from the east, carrying the faintest sound, a voice. At first, I thought it was the wind whistling through the trees. But then it said my name, not shouted, spoken, calm, even, like the way someone talks when they already know where you're standing. I froze mid-step, scanning the trees. Nothing. I tried to laugh it off, to tell myself I had imagined it, but the air had shifted. I could feel it. When I finally crawled into the tent, I left my boots on. My knife stayed in my hand. I told myself I'd sleep sitting up. I didn't. The voice came again in the middle of the night. Closer. This time, it whispered, "Why'd you come back?" I held my breath so long my lungs burned. When I couldn't take it anymore, I unzipped the tent just enough to look outside. The clearing was empty. Moonlight painted the trees silver. Nothing moved. Then I saw the boot print. A single print pressed into the mud right beside my fire pit, bigger than mine, fresh enough that water still pooled inside it. No other tracks led to or from it. That was enough. By dawn, I was already breaking camp, throwing things into my pack without folding or tying anything down. I didn't eat, I didn't drink, I just moved. The hike back felt endless. Every time I looked behind me, the trail seemed different. Trees standing where they hadn't before, turns that didn't exist on the way in. I told myself I was just panicking, that I'd lost the sense of direction that had always come naturally to me. But the woods felt alive in a way I couldn't name. Watching. Waiting. When I finally reached the road, my legs gave out. I fell to my knees, gasping. My car sat exactly where I'd left it, and beside it, half leaning against the driver's door, was a shape. At first, I thought it was a coat someone had hung there, but as I got closer, I realized what I was seeing. A canvas jacket, soaked down the front with something dark, draped over the outline of shoulders that were still too solid to be empty. I didn't look for a face.
Didn't look for anything. I just climbed into the car, locked the doors, and turned the key with shaking hands. In the rearview mirror, something moved between the trees. I drove until I hit pavement, then didn't stop until I saw houses again. That was the 7th story, and it's the one that convinced me. The mountains don't need ghosts. They make their own. My grandmother used to say, "The mountains remember what we forget." I never really understood what she meant until I met the man in the well. It was the summer of 2015. I was working part-time doing environmental surveys around abandoned mining property in West Virginia. My assignment was simple: mark hazards, take photos, note any open shafts. Most of the sites were empty scars, places nature had started reclaiming with moss and silence. But this one felt different. The GPS led me 2 miles off the main road to a hollow overgrown with poplar and vine. The air smelled stale, like rain trapped underground. I found what looked like a collapsed well. A circle of cracked stone no wider than a kitchen table. When I shined my flashlight inside, I saw standing water maybe 10 feet down. The beam caught something pale, just under the surface. I thought it was a plastic bag. Then, it moved. A ripple spread outward. I took a step back. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it echo off the trees. The thing, whatever it was, rose slowly. Just enough for me to see a face. It wasn't a reflection. It was looking up at me. Its features were human but blurred, like the water refused to let them settle into place. The mouth opened. No bubbles. No sound. Then I heard the voice, not through air, but inside my head.
Why did you come back? I dropped the flashlight. The beam spun wildly before dying in the grass. I ran. I don't remember the path back to the truck, just the slam of the door, the roar of the engine, the rain starting to fall in sheets. When I finally reached cell service, I called my supervisor, told her the site was unstable and needed fencing. She asked for photos. I lied and said the camera battery died. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I blinked, I saw that face beneath the water, watching, patient. Around 3 a.m., I heard dripping in the kitchen. I figured I'd left the faucet loose. But when I turned the light on, the sink was dry. The sound was coming from the hallway, from the ceiling. A dark spot spread across the plaster, dripping slow and steady. The drops hit the floor in perfect rhythm.
When I stepped closer, the smell hit me. Wet earth, iron, and something sour. The plaster bulged once, like something pressed from the other side. Then a single droplet fell onto my wrist. It was cold, too cold. The moment it touched skin, I heard that same voice again, clear as if it were whispering in my ear. Why did you leave me? I stumbled back, heart hammering. The lights flickered, then went out. The next morning, the stain was gone. Ceiling clean, floor dry. I quit that job a week later. Packed up, moved 2 states away, told myself it was just exhaustion, hallucination, anything that sounded sane. But here's the thing. 2 months ago, I got a letter. No return address, just my name written in shaky pencil. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the same well, same cracked stones, but this time the face was above the water, pale and wet, eyes open, staring straight into the camera. And on the back, 4 words. Still waiting for you. That was the 11th story. And if you ever find a well in the woods, don't look inside.
I was 21 when my cousin, Paige, called me crying. Her grandfather had died 2 weeks earlier, alone in his cabin, deep in the Blue Ridge. She couldn't bring herself to go back there, but the county was threatening to seize the property if someone didn't clean it out. I just need help for 1 afternoon, she said. Then I'll never go back again. We left before noon, her Corolla rattling down the back roads until the pavement gave up. The driveway was little more than 2 ruts choked with weeds. Even with the windows rolled up, the air smelled like damp soil and something faintly metallic. The cabin slumped at the bottom of a hollow, half hidden by trees. The porch leaned to one side, shingles curling like dead leaves. Every window was dark. God, Paige whispered, he really lived like this? We stepped out, gravel crunching underfoot. The forest was silent, not even birds. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove box, handed her one too. Let's just make it quick, I said. Inside, the air hit us like a wall. Old grease, dust, and something sweet and wrong. Every surface was coated in grime. Newspapers covered the kitchen table. A single chair sat overturned near the stove. Paige tied her shirt over her nose. It smells like something died in here. I didn't answer. There was a dark patch on the floor near the counter. I told myself it was oil. We worked in silence, she bagging papers, me checking cabinets. The man had saved everything. Cracked mugs, rusted tools, jars full of screws. There was a kind of desperate neatness to it, like he'd been organizing the chaos while it swallowed him. After an hour, I heard Paige call from the living room. "Eli, look at this." She was pointing toward the far wall. Someone had drawn symbols in pencil, rough circles, intersecting lines, repeated again and again. They crawled up the plaster all the way to the ceiling. "What the hell?" I muttered. My mom said he got weird before he died. Started talking about people in the ground. Before I could reply, something thudded upstairs. Heavy. Slow. We both froze. I tried to tell myself it was the house settling, but the sound came again, deliberate this time. Footsteps crossing the floor above us. Paige's eyes filled with tears. "He's gone, Eli. There's nobody up there." "Then maybe an animal," I said, though I didn't believe it. I grabbed the flashlight and started up the stairs. Each step groaned like a warning. At the top, the hallway stretched long and dark. One door hung half open. "Hello?" I called. Silence.
The air smelled wrong up there. Damp earth, mold, and something faintly sweet, like fruit left too long in a cellar. When I pushed the door open, the beam caught on glass jars lined across the shelf. Each one was filled with yellow liquid. Floating inside were shapes, small, grayish, half-rotted. I couldn't tell if they were animals or something else. Something brushed my shoulder. I spun around, light shaking. The hallway was empty. "Eli!" Paige's voice trembled from below. "Don't come up," I yelled. But it was too late. She was already halfway up the stairs. That's when the floor beneath me creaked. Slow. Deep. Like something was moving under it. I backed toward the stairs. The boards bulged once, twice, then split open with a wet crack. Something pale pushed through. A hand, long-fingered, skin stretched too thin. It gripped the floorboards like it was pulling itself up. Paige screamed. I grabbed her arm and dragged her down the stairs. Behind us came the sound of wood tearing, nails snapping, something crawling free. We hit the front door at a run. It wouldn't budge. "Locked," I gasped. "I didn't lock it," she cried. Then a voice drifted down the stairs, dry, whispering, almost gentle. "Don't take my things." We threw our weight against the door. The frame cracked. Sunlight spilled through as it burst open. We ran until the cabin was gone behind the trees. Neither of us spoke until we reached the car. When I looked back one last time, the front door was closed again. Perfectly. Quietly. That night, Paige texted me. "I can still hear him moving." I wanted to tell her it was just the wind, that we imagined it. But the next morning, I woke to a voicemail. Her voice, hoarse, terrified. "He came to my window." Then a single scrape, wood against glass, and silence. That was the 12th story. And if someone tells you not to go into the cellar, believe them. The last time I went camping alone was in 2019. It wasn't supposed to be an adventure, more like a test. I'd been working too long behind a desk, forgetting what silence sounded like. I wanted to prove I could still do it. Just me, the woods, and 6 nights without a phone signal. The spot I picked was deep in the Blue Valley Range, maybe 12 miles off the last paved road. It took all morning to get there, crossing 2 creeks, following a ridgeline that looked endless from below. When I finally reached the flat ground I'd marked on my map, the sun was already sliding toward the trees. It felt perfect. Too perfect. The air was still, the sky a deep, bruised blue. I remember thinking, this is the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat.
I built camp between 3 boulders that looked like they'd been placed there on purpose. The fire caught fast. The first night was calm, just the pop of wood and the whisper of wind in the branches. But the quiet changed on the second day. The forest didn't sound empty anymore. It sounded watchful. I can't explain it better than that. Every time I turned my head, I'd catch the faintest shift of leaves. No footsteps, no animal sounds, just that subtle awareness. Late that afternoon, I went exploring. About half a mile down the ridge, I found something odd. A patch of freshly turned soil. No tracks, no shovel marks, just a smooth mound about 3 feet long and 1 foot high. It looked too deliberate to be an animal. I crouched down, brushing away a layer of leaves. The dirt was damp, cold to the touch. That's when I noticed something sticking out near the edge. A small scrap of blue fabric. It looked like a child's shirt sleeve. My stomach dropped. I didn't dig any deeper. I backed away slowly, whispering under my breath, "It's nothing! It's nothing!" When I got back to camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that the trees had shifted, like they'd closed ranks while I was gone. That night, I made the fire bigger than before. Flames high enough to light the boulders around me. I told myself it was just for warmth. At some point, I must have drifted off, sitting upright. Then a voice woke me. It was close. So close it felt like it came from inside the tent. "Where did you bury it?" I froze. My brain scrambled for logic. Maybe a dream. Maybe the radio from my pack. But I hadn't brought one. The voice came again, rougher this time, like gravel sliding over metal. "Where did you bury it?" I unzipped tent halfway. The fire was dying, just a glow of embers. Beyond it, the forest looked black and endless. I didn't see anyone. Then the breathing started. Slow, heavy, behind me. I turned.
Something tall stood just outside the tent flap. Its outline shimmered in the dim firelight, wrong somehow, too narrow at the shoulders, too long in the arms. It didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, slowly, it crouched. The sound it made wasn't human, a wet, dragging rasp, like lungs filling with mud. I fumbled for the knife at my side, hand shaking so hard I dropped it. When I looked back up, it was gone. Only the trees, only silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By dawn, I'd already packed half my gear. I didn't even eat, just started walking. Every step, I felt eyes on me. About 2 miles from the trailhead, I stopped to catch my breath. The morning mist was thick. Every shape looked like it could be a person if you stared too long. That's when I saw the boot print, pressed deep into the mud right in front of me, twice the size of mine, perfectly centered on the path. No other prints before or after. I followed it with my eyes, tracing where it might have come from, and there, between 2 trees, I saw the figure. It stood still, almost blending into the fog, except for the way it seemed to breathe, the shoulders lifting slow, then lowering. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. When I reached my car, I didn't stop to unlock the trunk. I just threw the gear into the back seat and tore down the mountain road. It took hours before my heartbeat finally slowed. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the voice, the thing in the dark, was my mind unraveling from too much isolation. But a week later, I got an email from my brother. He knew the area I'd camped in, said a ranger had called him after finding my permit tag on the trail. They'd been investigating an illegal burial site. When they excavated it, they found bones, small ones, human, and the cloth they'd wrapped them in? Blue. That was the 13th story. And sometimes, the woods don't just keep secrets. They ask you to return them.
I used to think the scariest things in the Appalachians were animals. Black bears, coyotes, snakes hidden under brush. But that was before I met the caller in Pine Root Hollow. This happened 3 years ago, when I was volunteering with a missing person search crew. Most of our calls were routine: hikers losing daylight, tourists underestimating terrain. But every so often, the mountains swallow someone and refuse to spit them back out. This case was like that. A teenage boy went missing near Pine Root Hollow. 15, quiet, liked bird watching. He'd gone out around dusk to photograph owls. He never came home. By sunrise, they had us grid walking the ridge. Fog hung low, thick enough to blur the tree line into one long shadow. The air smelled like wet bark and iron, the kind of smell that crawls into your clothes and doesn't wash out. I just started my sweep when the radio crackled. "Unit 3, do you read? We have audio." Audio? That wasn't normal. Static buzzed, then a faint voice. "Stop. Please, stop." Every hair on my arms lifted. It sounded like the missing boy. Coordinates sent. He might still be moving. I pushed through brush, branches clawing at my jacket. The terrain pitched downward into a ravine. My boots slid on damp leaves, and more than once I had to grab roots to stay upright. Halfway down, I heard it again. But this time, not through the radio. From the trees below. "Stop! Please, stop!" The voice cracked like it was straining to breathe. "Hello," I called out. "We're coming to help you. Stay where you are." Silence. Then, a whisper right behind me. "Help me." I spun around so fast I nearly fell. The woods were still. Too still. I forced myself to keep going. My breath fogged in front of me, even though it wasn't that cold. At the bottom of the ravine, I found a clearing, a perfect circle of bare earth. No leaves, no branches, nothing disturbed, like the ground knew better than to hold footprints. My radio clipped again. But this time, the voice wasn't the boy. Low, gravel rough. "Stop. Please, stop." Repeating the exact same intonation as before, like something was mimicking him. I swallowed hard. "If you can hear me, shout. We're right here." Branches rustled behind me. I turned slowly. A shape stood between two trees, tall,
narrow, like it hadn't quite decided how to fit inside human proportions. Its head cocked slightly, like it was studying me. "Help me," it repeated, the boy's voice exactly, down to the tremble. I took one step back. "Where are you?" I radioed quietly, never breaking eye contact with the thing. Static. Then command replied, "We don't have your signal. Repeat transmission." I was alone. Completely alone. The figure's chest expanded, then collapsed with a slow, unnatural shudder, like lungs learning how to breathe. Then it spoke again, but this time it used my voice. "Stop!" I don't remember dropping my radio, or turning, or running. But suddenly I was clawing my way up the ridge, lungs on fire, vision tunneling. The woods blurred around me, branches grabbing at my pack, rocks shifting underfoot, like the mountain itself was trying to trip me. I didn't stop until I burst out near the search camp, gasping, mud streaked up my arms. They found the boy's camera 2 days later at the edge of the hollow. The last photo on it wasn't of an owl, just a dark shape in the trees, leaning forward as if listening. His body was never found. Sometimes late at night, when the house settles and my ears pick up more than they should, I think about that clearing, about the voice, about the thing trying on someone else's fear like a borrowed coat. And every so often, on the edge of sleep, I hear my own voice whisper from the dark corner of the room, "Stop." That was the 14th story. And in these mountains, if you ever hear someone calling for help in the wrong voice, keep walking.
I've always hated empty houses. They don't sound the way they should. Too much air between the walls. Too much space for old noises to echo around and find you again. In 2021, I took a contract job restoring historical homes in western North Carolina. Most were beautiful wrecks, wraparound porches eaten by ivy, stained glass windows clinging to their last fragments of color. But one house still makes me wake in the night. Locals called it the Wexner Place. It had been sitting empty since 1987, when the last family disappeared. The official story said they moved suddenly, left the skate without telling anyone, but every tool left in the shed, every dish still in the sink told a different story. I was hired to catalog damage before reconstruction began. 2 days, maybe 3. When I first stepped inside, the air was heavy, a sweet, stale weight that clung to my tongue. Wallpaper hung like wet skin, and water stains crawled down from the ceiling. Still, I'd seen worse. I set up my tripod in the front hall, snapped photos, moved through the rooms. Everything was ordinary until I reached the upstairs landing. There were footprints in the dust, small, bare, leading toward the end of the hall to a door half open. I froze. Every other surface was thick with decades of gray,
But these prints were clean, fresh. "Hello?" I called. Nothing. When I reached the door, the air on the other side was colder, 10 degrees at least. The room was a child's bedroom, wallpaper of faded moons and stars, a wooden rocking horse tipped on its side, and in the corner, a mirror taller than me, draped with a yellow sheet. It took me a second to realize the sheet was moving, not swaying, breathing.
I thought maybe a vent was open, but there was no air current, no sound except my own heartbeat. I gripped the edge of the cloth and pulled. The mirror reflected the room perfectly, except for one thing. There was a boy standing behind me. I turned, no one there. When I looked back, he was closer. Bare feet, hollow eyes. Then his reflection lifted a hand and pressed it against the glass. But the glass bowed outward, like water rippling under pressure. I stumbled back. The tripod clattered against the floor. The sheet slipped off completely. The boy's face looked blurred, half submerged in some invisible surface. His mouth moved, slow, deliberate. The sound that came out was wet and muffled, like speech through a wall of water. I ran. My boots thundered down the stairs, my breath ragged. At the front door, I grabbed the handle and froze again. My reflection in the glass window pane wasn't mine. It was his. A child's face. Wide eyes, pale skin dripping like wet paint. I wrenched the door open and stumbled into the yard. The air outside felt too sharp, too bright. I didn't stop running until I reached the van. When I turned the key, the radio hissed to life. Static, then a whisper. "Come back." I slammed it off. I drove straight to town, shaking the whole way. The next morning, I told my supervisor I was done. He thought I was exaggerating. He laughed, said, "You saw a raccoon in the mirror." But that afternoon, he went to check the site himself. He didn't come back. The sheriff found his truck parked outside the Wexler place, engine still warm, driver's door open. Inside, all they found was his camera. Every photo showed the same room, the same mirror, and in each frame, the boy stood a little closer to the lens. That was the 15th story. And if you ever walk into an empty house and find footprints that aren't yours, don't follow them.
I grew up near the border of Virginia and Tennessee. A quiet stretch of hills and hollows where old train lines cut through the trees like veins. When I was a kid, the track still ran at night. The sound of the whistle would drift across the valley, slow and mournful. My grandmother used to say, "That's not a train you're hearing. That's the one that never stopped." I thought she meant it as a joke. I found out later she didn't. The story was old, about a passenger train that derailed in 1912. They said it went off a collapsed bridge outside Marion County,
killing everyone on board. No bodies were recovered. The current was too strong, the gorge too deep. Locals called it the Midnight Line. For years afterward, people claimed to see a light drifting along the abandoned rails, a single lantern swinging in the dark, followed by the faint sound of a whistle that wasn't there. When I was 17, my best friend Adam decided we should go see for ourselves. "It's a ghost story," he said, grinning. "How many people get to say they chased one?" We set out just before midnight. The moon was thin, barely enough light to make out the rails. We walked for miles, the air damp and heavy. After a while, we stopped talking. The woods around us felt muted. No frogs, no crickets, just the distant hiss of wind. When the first whistle came, it was faint, almost gentle, like a memory instead of a sound. Then the rails began to hum. I froze, staring down to my boots. The vibration was real, rattling through the steel like something massive was coming. Adam laughed nervously. "That's impossible. These lines are dead." The whistle came again, louder this time, long and low, echoing through the trees. And then we saw the light. A single beam, far down the tracks, swaying side to side like a lantern. At first, I thought it was someone walking, but the light moved too smooth, gliding forward at a steady pace, gaining speed. "Someone's driving out here," Adam said, though his voice didn't sound convinced. I whispered, "There's no road." The light grew brighter, white at the center, red at the edges, and behind it, for just a moment, I saw windows, rows of them. A full passenger car glowing faintly, rolling towards us with no sound but the whistle. I said, "Run!" Adam didn't move. He just stood there staring like he was seeing something I couldn't. His mouth was open, his eyes wide. "Do you hear them?" he whispered. "What?" "The passengers. They're calling my name." I grabbed his arm, tried to pull him, but he wouldn't budge. The light was almost on us now, flooding the rails with blinding white. I dove off the rails into the brush. The air roared. Wind, metal, screams, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the whole world was splitting open. When I looked up, the light was gone. The tracks were empty. Adam stood in the middle of the rails, trembling. His face was pale, eyes glassy.
"Did you see them?" he said. "There was nothing," I gasped. "It's gone." He just shook his head. "They saw me." We didn't talk much on the walk back. He wouldn't look at me. A week later, his mom called. Adam hadn't come home. They found his truck parked by the old railway bridge. Engine off, door open, footprints leading down the embankment toward the water. They never found him. A month after that, I drove out to the same spot alone. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see it again, to make it make sense. The moon was full this time. The tracks gleamed silver under the light. When I reached the bridge, the air went cold, that sudden, heavy cold that doesn't belong in summer. And then I heard it, the faint sound of a train horn, distant, closer. I turned, and there it was, the light.
moving slow this time, gliding across the rails with a kind of sorrow. And for just a moment I saw faces pressed against the glass, pale, drifting by like smoke. In the last car, someone was standing at the back, holding a lantern. It was Adam. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out. The train passed, the light fading, until there was nothing but darkness again. When I stepped back onto the bridge, the rails were still humming underfoot. I stood there for a long time listening until the wind carried the echo of that same lonely whistle down the valley. That was the 16th story. And if you ever hear a train where no tracks remain, don't wait to see its light.
I didn't set out to collect these stories. They found me. Every trip, every hollow, every quiet town clinging to the side of a ridge, someone always has a story to tell. They start the same way. You're not from here, are you? Then they lean in a little closer, like what they're about to say still belongs to the mountain. Over the years, I started writing them down. The whispers, the disappearances, the sounds in the dark. But somewhere along the way, I realized something unsettling. The stories aren't just about fear. They're about remembrance. The mountains don't forget the people who vanish. They keep them. It was last winter when I finally understood that. I had driven out toward the edge of the Smokies to interview a park ranger who'd worked there 30 years. The man was quiet, thin, his hands trembling as he poured coffee into chipped mugs. He said, "You ever wonder why so many of our missing never get found? It's not that they're gone, it's that they're taken back." I asked what he meant. He looked toward the window. The mountain keeps what belongs to it. Before I could ask more, he slid an old cassette tape across the table. No label, just a strip of masking tape with a date. March 12, 1994. He said, "Play it when you're alone, and not here." I didn't. Not right away. I drove back to my motel that night, one of those roadside places with buzzing lights and hollow walls. The snow was coming down hard, piling against the windows. At 2:13 a.m., I woke to the sound of voices. They were coming from my bag. The recorder had turned itself on. I stared at it for a long minute, half asleep, half scared to move. The reel turned slow, the tape whining faintly. Then a voice filled the room. Familiar. My own. Don't go back. The sound warped, slowed, then deepened into something else. Layers of voices echoing in unison. Men, women, children. Some whispering, some laughing quietly, like a conversation just beyond the edge of understanding. And beneath it all, the hum, low, steady, like the pulse of the earth. I shut the recorder off, but the sound didn't stop. It was coming from outside the window now, soft, almost gentle, like someone humming under their breath. I pulled back the curtain. Snow, falling sideways, and in the reflection of the glass behind me,
I saw movement. Shapes. Dozens of them, standing in the room. Faint and translucent. Their eyes weren't hollow. They were focused, watching me. One of them stepped forward, a woman. Her hair hung in wet ropes, her dress torn and muddy. Her mouth moved, but instead of sound, I heard her voice inside my chest. You shouldn't have listened. The lights flickered. Every bulb in the room buzzed, humming in that same deep note from the tape. I stumbled back, hit the nightstand, sent the recorder to the floor. The tape spun until it snapped. Then everything went still. When I opened my eyes, it was morning. The snow had stopped. The room was empty, except for the tape, cracked in two. I packed fast, left the key on the counter, and didn't look back. A week later, I tried to call the ranger. The number was disconnected. I checked local records. No one by his name worked for the Park Service. No one had for decades. That's when I stopped collecting stories. Or tried to.
Because lately, the stories have started finding me again. Voices in the static when I listen to the radio late at night. Footsteps in empty hallways when I'm editing recordings. And sometimes, in the quiet between breaths, I swear I can hear that faint echo of that same whistle from the old train line, the midnight line, calling from somewhere deep under the earth. I've come to accept something. These stories don't end. They just wait. Every sound in these mountains, every whisper, every missing name carved into bark, every half-seen shadow at the edge of the tree line, they're all connected. They're not hauntings. They're memories. And if you stay quiet long enough, they'll remember you too. That was the 17th and final story. And this is your reminder. The mountains never forget their dead.